Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for the Kestrel Colonial Force. In this video, we'll be talking about the strengths and faction identity of Kestrel before jumping into Infinity Army as usual to go through the many outstanding profiles that make up this excellent faction. And make no bones about it, Kestrel Colonial Force is an exceptional faction in Infinity the Game. If there are two S-tier factions in the game, one of them is Combined Army and one of them is Kestrel, and which you think is better is far more a matter of how you make that measurement and what you personally value than any real inherent power in either of them. And while this is not a combined army video, it is a Kestrel video, I think it's actually worth talking a little bit about that comparison, because Kestrel is powerful in different ways to combined army, but it is also the only faction in the game, really, that actually has strengths that allow for that comparison to be made. And so because the comparison is illustrative, let's just talk for a moment about a completely different faction and why Combined Army is powerful and looms so large in some people's minds. Now, Combined Army is the undisputed king of what I might call inner vacuum threat vectors. Deploying first and going second is not something that I'm willing to do against many factions or players in this game, but I am least willing to do it against Combined Army because of how many possible things Combined Army could bring to bear and how different those things are in a vacuum before I have seen the bulk of their list. When you are deploying against Combined Army, and you haven't seen everything, the list of things that you have to hold in your mind that are different and powerful and could kill you or represent an existential threat in so many different ways is massive. Just off the top of my head, a Carontid, an Anathematic, Nochias, Sheshkin, Achilles, a Specular Killer, a Rush by Krakots. All direct, dangerous, and powerful but in different ways. A Pitcher and Hacker Assault led by Bit and Kiss. Smoke Shooting, Albedo Shooting. Two different Parachutist deployment zone models, one of whom is multi-wound. A Combat Jump Tag. The list is just massive, and it's almost impossible to conceive of a deployment that effectively defends against all of those myriad and highly different threats. But in reality, no combined army list fits all of those. They are mostly expensive. They are very dangerous and very powerful, but a combined army list has to choose which two or three or maybe four of those incredibly lethal pieces it's going to use to ruin your day. It has to compromise. And that's what sets it apart from Kestrel, because Kestrel does not really require compromise. With very few exceptions, Kestrel lists just go together like an absolute dream. It is the list building equivalent of sitting down in a perfectly maintained vintage car, turning the key, and hearing the engine engage note perfect. The whole army just hangs together incredibly well. It gives you everything you want. It puts a floor under your performance, and it handles wonderfully. And for that reason, while you might choose to do your S and A and B tier rankings based on things like how you conceive of power and how you conceive of maximum threat, I think if we were to step back from that and just say, what do I think is the best faction in the game? As holistically as possible, the answer for me is Kestrel Colonial Force. And we're going to break that down and we're going to talk about why. And we will cover the limitations that Kestrel has because it does have some. But all of this should be framed through the lens of this faction is just incredible. It's incredible in ways that make it a joy to list build for, that make it a joy to play, that make it very powerful, and it's a faction that perform very well in the hands not just of experienced players, but it's an excellent entry point into Infinity as well. So, what are, to start with, the strengths of Kestrel Colonial Force? To begin with, superlative firepower. It's Pan-Oceania, but what a Pan-Oceania? In any given list, you can have your selection of great MSV gunfighting, great mimetism gunfighting, albedo if you want it, marksmanship, loads of dice, a good mix of ammunition types, and a good mix of ranges. Kestrel shoots like a dream, and while it is not immune to losing face-to-face rolls, it is one of the best gunfighting factions in the entire game. It leverages that gunfighting ability further with just huge order pools and counterintelligence. Your average Kestrel list, going first, having command tokens spent to strip an order from you, will often still have 16 or 17 orders to play with on its first turn. If it's not going first, it is extremely comfortable going second. It has great ARO pieces, some of the best in the game, and it has very good midfield that you can choose to spend either a little or a lot on. We're actually going to focus on the midfield quite a bit when we get to a specific profile, because I will make the contention that Kestrel Colonial Force has the best midfield profile in the entire game. It's got fantastic low end to support its high end. Like, there are great heavy infantry and great tags in this faction, but those are supplemented by a ton of really high quality list building options, ranging anywhere from 6 up to about 18 points. That low end is just as important to the power of a faction as the very top end of things that you can play. And for every Tikbalang lieutenant that you have access to in this profile, you have something like a Jackal to complement it. It's got very good fire team options. You have great fire team core options, great fire team Haris options, great fire team duo options, including a very rare example of an impure fire team duo that is nevertheless one of the best duo setups in the game. It's also a faction that is not a slouch when it comes to close assault, and it has that very particular kind of close assault that you fit into lists thanks to taking troops for other reasons that give you good close combatants. Things like the Yamabushi and the Crux fill out a list in ways that are not contingent on them being a close combat expert, a model like Shona Carano that you might really build a tactic around, but who you're taking for other reasons and incidentally give you surprisingly good close combat. Kestrel is also a faction that has, by Parachutists standards, really quite good hacking. It's got network projection and a frankly very sound killer hacker, and that network projection, in the form of a fast panda, is also worth noting. It's a wonderful combination of a fast panda on your model that is a hacker, so you don't have to spend combat group slots on both a hacker and the model that is enabling that. You get that on a single excellent piece, which gives you a very low impost, army building wise, splash of hacking, still doing everything you might need hacking to do. Kestrel is a faction with good visibility control. Like, legitimately, you can build Kestrel Colonial Force armies that have got better visibility control than Ariadna, thanks to the fact that Disco Ball has very forgiving ranges, is on a very accessible troop profile, and is Eclipse. Kestrel has multiple incredible lieutenant options. Only in Kestrel would you see a profile like the Magistrate and go, that's outstanding, but it is not necessarily the best lieutenant in the entire faction. There is competition. It's also, on top of all of that, a faction with some really interesting, unique profiles that do things that are not much like stuff that any other faction has access to. A drummer is not necessarily a build around, but it's cool and interesting and allows for some flex in an army and a space to explore that is really valuable in terms of long-term fun. And so just like, wow, wow, what a list of qualities. This is a really, really strong faction. Now, to give it a fair shake, there are some limitations to Kestrel Colonial Force, some things that keep it constrained, some things which you have to account for. Your fire team, not necessarily choices, your fire team choices are excellent, but you are limited by the fact that you have one core and one Haris, and that does matter in Kestrel. There are a lot of lists that you might choose to build, but which you can't because you've only got the one Haris, you've only got the one core, and there are certain fire teams that can only be one or the other. You can absolutely make up for that with duos, and the list that will show off at the end of this video has 4 fire teams in it making use of those duos, but it is a consideration. The hacking, as good as it is still Panoshianian hacking. And there are kind of 2 things to mention there. The first is that as good as Kestrel is at splashing in a little bit of hacking, it is unlikely to dominate the info war against a dedicated opponent, and it can be vulnerable to a really aggressive hacking assault against it. Many of your best pieces in this faction are going to be hackable heavy infantry or tags or remotes, and if your opponent blankets you in pitches on the first turn, unpicking that and dealing with all of that is something you don't have the luxury of ignoring. You have to do that. That adds an order impost. It's a tactic that can be quite effective against Kestrel. Another limitation is that Kestrel tends to have very visible lieutenants, and chain of command does exist in this faction, and it's a quite good chain of command profile for not too many points, but chain of command can be a luxury that even Kestrel does not always afford. This can put you in a situation where you have to defend your lieutenant, whether that be with distance or dedicated ARO pieces, but if someone gets lucky with spec fire or a guided attack, you can sometimes find yourself in a situation where you have to play through a turn of loss of lieutenant. And finally, and I kind of can't believe I'm calling this a weakness, but just to note, it is possible to build Kestrel lists that are quite vulnerable to albedo and white noise. Now, that is the most mealy-mouthed way of saying, by God, you can have a lot of visors and marksmanship in this faction, but it is a thing to note. You can run 2 Griffin and a Hetkari as your active turn guns, and wow, that's outstanding. But if you run into albedo, or your opponent has white noise, just be aware that it imposes some limitations on how, in particular, you might choose to conduct your ARO defense. And so, overall, kind of where does that leave Kestrel Colonial Force in terms of identity? I would describe them, ultimately, as just absolutely peak Pan-Oceania. Way back in the old days, we used to describe the shock army of Acontecimento as Pan-Oceania, but with tech, but with the things that Pan-Oceania didn't usually have. Kestrel Colonial Force feels a lot like that, but without sacrificing any of the resilience or damage or danger that Pan-Oceanian active turn gunfighters have. It is an absolutely fantastic faction for a new player. It puts a floor under your performance like no other faction, while still just having loads of top end for a powerful player to leverage. And it is, as I noted, in my opinion, probably the best faction in the entire game. And so, with that utterly glowing review, I think it's probably best now to cut to the chase and jump straight into Infinity Army. Because if we want to talk about how Kestrel Colonial Force plays in faction identity terms, actually the best thing to do now is just to start going through all of the troopers that inform that so heavily. And that starts with Fennec Fusiliers. Fennec Fusiliers are obviously the core of the Fennec fire team, which is one of the most common cores that you will build in Kestrel Colonial Force. Sometimes it will be a 3 or a 4-person or even a 5-person core, but most lists will be happy to include a Fennec Fusilier core, and the reason for that is that firstly is an excellent fire team core, but secondly, Fennec Fusiliers are probably the best line infantry in the entire game. Just in terms of sheer utility and versatility of these profiles, I do not think there is any line infantry regiment that is collectively as good as Fennec's. There are line infantry regiments in other armies that have individual or even 2 or 3 very good profiles, very cool, interesting, or attractive. Gulam infantry, for example, have a fantastic NCO grenade and smoke grenade launcher and an effective willpower 17 doctor. That's excellent. But even that falls short of the sheer amount of flexibility you can get from Fennec Fusilier profiles, particularly the more esoteric ones. Now, there are the usual things that you might expect here. There's a missile launcher and a heavy machine gun. We're not taking any of those ever. There is even a submachine gun light rocket launcher profile for an astoundingly cheap 12 points. Probably not often taking that either, but it is something that you can consider. There's a lieutenant that you will almost never take. There's a paramedic that you will occasionally include because paramedics are useful. This is Pan-Oceania. Kestrel Colonial Force actually has one of the best doctors in the game, but a paramedic in a faction with moderate to high phys heavy infantry is still a paramedic. And with those profiles are all out of the way, we can now get to the actual real meat and potatoes. There are 3 profiles in particular, in addition to just the paramedic, which is useful, that are outstanding. The first is the triangulated fire, Thunderbolt +1 burst, shock mine, mine layer. This is only 14 points for a mine layer, and a 0 SWC long range gun that can be firing 4 dice if it's in a fire team, which will always be, and its ballistic skill 12, which definitely makes a difference when capitalizing on those 4 dice. All of this just for 14 points, a little bit of deployment zone defense, and even the ability to triangulated fire to make sure that you are always rolling just those 4 dice with no modifiers, even give you a little bit of ability to contest things like enemy mimeters and -6 ARO pieces. It's very useful to include a model like the Mine Layer Fennec in a list that, for example, is running a large number of MSV and marksmanship pieces, just because it gives you one gun that isn't relying on those skills in case there is an enemy model with albedo. But most of the time, this Fennec is a backup gun and a mine layer mine in your deployment zone, which is excellent for 14 points. The Hacker is also outstanding. Armed with a submachine gun and an emitter is a great gun to have. Fundamentally, this is a half an SWC and 16-point hacker profile with a fast panda, which means that in one model you get your hacking and your network projection as part of a model that can form the basis of a fire team. which means you get your minimum viable entry into the hacking market in just one model for cheap, which means that if your opponent goes all out and they fire pitches at you and they're a killer hacking, and they blow your hacker out, okay, cool, it was 16 points and it wasn't a core part of your game plan anyway. But if you are in a situation where your opponent is running hackable units against you, and you can keep the Fennec safe, it's just that little bit of info ward defense, right? Those hacking AROs that make certain kinds of attacks against you just that little bit more difficult to leverage. It's one more defensive obstacle that your opponent has to overcome. And on top of all of that, it is randomly just a BTS 3 hacker, which means that even though it's willpower 12, very occasionally it will survive something that it shouldn't, which on a 16-point hacker is excellent. And then finally, the Forward Observer Fennec. What a bag of value this thing is. So there are three very important things about this profile. Firstly, it's 13 points, but secondly, it is a Forward Observer, which is a relevant specialist type in more and more scenarios these days. We have not yet, at time of recording, seen the most recent ITS pack. It is speculated to be out very soon, but at least one Forward Observer specialist mission was introduced at Interplanetario, and so Forward Observer can be a good specialist type. On top of that, it's got a sensor. Now, there is at least one other very high quality and useful sensor profile in Kestrel Colonial Force, but having them is very useful, and particularly if we're doing something like moving up the field with a Crux Knight in a fire team, being able to just casually discover and deal with enemy camouflage pieces is something that Panoceania, with its moderate willpower, would normally struggle with. No problem, Kestrel builds a solution to that into their core fire team thanks to the Fennec Sensor Forward Observer. And then finally, it has a Disco Baller. It's a Ballistic Skill 12 linkable Disco Baller for 13 points, which is the reason why Kestrel Colonial Force can have, if they want to, better visibility control than most other factions. It is trivial to include these guys, and they are providing utility in other ways, which means that at the 11th hour, when the guns have fallen silent, and all it's have to do is just to get something onto an objective to win the game, Fennec Fusilier, Sensor, Forward Observer, Disco Baller has your back. And these things collectively make Fennec Fusiliers the highest utility, and therefore, frankly, the best line infantry in the game, because that is the measure of utility of a line infantry. N5 is not a game where the fact that you can take a missile launcher on your line infantry is particularly relevant. We are running lists that are too efficient to waste a slot on that. We have access to better quality AROs if we want to use them, and better tools if we don't. But since the line infantry will often form out the core of a fire team core in your army, utility is what you want, and there is no line infantry in the game that does it as well as Fennec Fusiliers. Now, off the back of an incredible utility line infantry troop, we need something for those line infantry to force multiply, and as far as tips of the spear go, there are not many better options than the Griffin troop heavy tactical regiment. Mostly because of low fizz and low willpower scores, these guys come in absolute aces basically everywhere else that it counts, which makes them one of the best heavy infantry for cost in the game. 6-2 move is outstanding, ballistic skill 14 is outstanding, armor 4 BTS 6 is really outstanding, and then they just randomly have a multispectral visor level 1 and courage. Courage is particularly important because willpower 12, one of the only meaningful downsides that it has for a non-specialist heavy infantry is just passing guts rolls when you are trying to stay standing as an ARO piece. Griffin troops have courage, no worries, fill your boots. Now they have a few other random pieces skills as well. They jump well, they have terrain desert, but it is the ballistic skill 14 and MSV 1 and courage on a good quality heavy infantry chassis that makes them what they are, and then they have the weapons to leverage it. Not many profiles here, but a heavy machine gun and a Feuerback are basically your two preferred guns of choice for linkable heavy infantry. A HMG for high burst and a Feuerback for higher damaging rounds. Both of them are extremely suitable as active turn weapons. The Feuerback doubles quite well as a reactive turn weapon, and hey, while we're talking about things, they've all got pulsars, which are large template weapons. The Lieutenant is also a surprisingly viable option. Bit of a niche pick, but there are some scenarios that will want you to take a Lieutenant that can survive some danger. And while a Griffin for a HMG isn't necessarily the first choice I would make there, just bear it in mind as a Lieutenant. And in fact, if your opponent ever says they have a Willpower 12 Lieutenant in Kestrel Colonial Force, look for the Griffin HMG because it's not particularly likely to be a Fennec. Overall, just the thing about these guys is that they slot into fire teams very, very effectively, which means that even though just on their merits they are excellent, they will always be packing +1 special die, and often other higher levels of fireteam bonuses as well. It's really not terribly difficult to get a nice pure 4-person fireteam, which puts them at ballistic skill 15 because they count as Fennec troopers. And so between Fennecs and these guys, you have an outstanding start to an outstanding faction. Now, moving down the line of pieces that can join a Fennec fire team, strictly speaking, before we get to the wildcards, we should talk about the Black Air. And when we're talking about the Black Air, there is one primary profile at this point in the faction review that is important to talk about, and that is the Neurokinetics Multi-Sniper Rifle Black Air. Ballistic Skill 13, Mimetism 3, and an MSV 2 means that with sniper range bands, you are firing 2 dice plus 1 special dice with an MSV2 and Mimetism in ARO, often Ballistic Skill 13, but occasionally Ballistic Skill 14, which is just one of the best ARO pieces in the entire game. Despite that, the Black Air Sniper is a sometimes piece. You don't actually need the Black Air Sniper to successfully defend with most Kestrel Colonial Force lists, mostly because the Feuerback Griffin exists and it is about as good depending on what it is that you need. If you think about the role of ARO pieces, most of the time you are not really taking ARO pieces to kill, you are taking ARO pieces to deny your opponent the ability to execute the plan they want to execute on the first turn, to constrain their orders, to force them to spend those orders in a particular way, to prevent routes of ingress into the midfield or your deployment zone. All of those things are primary over killing your opponent in ARO, because killing your opponent in ARO is generally pretty unrealistic, because your opponent gets to choose the risks that they assume most of the time in their active turn. The Black Air, however, for what it's worth, is one of the most lethal ARO pieces in the game. It will usually require either avoiding it, or a special response, or just rolling the dice and hoping to win. But rolling the dice and hoping to win is something that you can genuinely do against the Black Air, because despite all of the other qualities that it is just 1 wound. Any old 5 dice HMG can at least theoretically spool up, spray and pray, and put the Black Air down, and at 33 points, that's a little bit difficult for me to contemplate in most lists. For that reason, the Black Air is a sometimes food. If you have a very specific plan or a way that you want to approach a mission, it should be considered more of a tech piece, maybe used in conjunction with other elements, because fundamentally neurokinetics is a limiting option. You can take active turn firefights with the Black Air if you need to, because the special die will still apply in active turn, but 1 dice plus 1 special die is not a face-to-face roll that many people will want to be taking, particularly in Panoceania, where so much of your plan revolves around aggressive firepower dominance. Still, the Black Air is high watermark capability, and we will come back to this profile a little bit later on to talk about the other notable Black Air profile. Now, from the Black Air, which is formally part of the Fennec Fire Team entry, we get into notable wildcards, and there are a couple that are very relevant here that will also segue us into our next Fire Team. And the first of these is the Team Crux Father Knight. Now, these guys are not cheap, but they are also, importantly, not SWC expensive, because it is the marksman rifle profiles that you are most wanted to pay attention to. My personal recommendation is to not worry too much about spending points on strategic deployment. I do not personally find I get terribly much value from it. And so while there are a bunch of different profiles that can be well worth experimenting with here, I would draw your attention in particular to the 46-point Crux Knight FTO with the damage 5 multi-marksman rifle, drop bears, and D-charges. That's an interesting profile just by itself, because generally speaking, the only issue with a multi-marksman rifle is, okay, it's kind of low burst and it's low damage. Damage 5 with armor piercing is actually really quite dangerous, and it leverages that very, very well thanks to ballistic skill 14 and ballistic skill attack plus 1 special die. Beast attack plus 1 special die is one of the best ballistic skill attack modifiers in the entire game, because there is nothing that stops it, there is nothing that interacts negatively with it, and it works in ARO. That means that Crux Knights can be kind of a medium range ARO piece of opportunity, because if this guy is in a fire team, he is firing off 3 dice in ARO at ballistic skill 14 with armor 5 and BTS 6, and he's religious, which means he will hold his ground. Which means that putting this guy down in ARO can be very, very difficult. And you can't even range in under the multi-marksman rifle because he still has a multi-pistol as well. He's also an albedo piece, and albedo is a rule that is definitely of like inconsistent relevance in Infinity N5, but it is still nice to have some of the time and it's not expensive. Having it on, frankly, a quite good gunfighter like the Team Crux Father Knight gives you just that opportunity occasionally to blow out an ARO piece thanks to Albedo, that otherwise you might have to think a little bit harder about how you are dealing or deal with main force. With the Crux Knight, just sometimes don't forget this rule exists, basically. Often it will not matter, occasionally it will matter a lot. Now, the reasons why this guy is good don't stop there. He is move 6-2. He is a specialist. He has stealth. He's willpower 13. And he's also a source of some fairly good close combat. Now, I say fairly good, he is just fairly good close combat. CC22, Martial Arts 2, and a DA CCW with damage 5 is okay. It is good enough to be a meaningful threat to non-experts and to deter experts coming in on you some of the time, particularly given how durable you are, armor 5, BTS 6, and 2 wounds. But kind of the important thing about all of those attributes is that the Father Knight is not paying aggressively for them. Some of those 46 points you're paying for this profile, yes, are paying for those martial arts, but you are not overpaying for them. You're kind of getting them just as part of the troop profile. I am very comfortable paying this many points for this model. And that means if I have a list that includes a Team Crux Father Knight, not only am I getting a very viable medium range weapon capable of threatening most targets, on a model who is also a specialist and has some utility equipment, but I am getting some close combat. And it's anti-materiel close combat, which matters in some scenarios. It's just like that nice, it's not, like I mentioned, it's not Shona Carano, it's not Lang Kai, it's not that I am taking this model because they are a close combat expert. I am taking the Team Crux Father Knight because of all of the other things they do, but I am incidentally getting some good close combat skills, and that makes them an outstanding wildcard. You can very easily add a Team Crux Father Knight to a team of 2 Fennec Fusiliers, drag them up the field and back with him. They will force multiply him, get him to 2 special die, maybe provide a paramedic and a disco ball. Like, it's just a very solid fire team where the cost of the Team Crux is more than covered by the cheapness of the Fennecs. And frankly, in a pinch, you can even run him solo. It is not the end of the world if he has to leave his Fennec friends behind. Excellent piece, and a wild card, and especially the 0SWC cost, means that his inclusion in the list, although he is expensive points-wise, tends to open up a bunch of interesting builds. Our next very interesting wild card, and that one of the best doctors in the game that I mentioned before, is Fusilier Indigo by Bipandra. What a glow up she has had. Now, just on her merits, this is kind of a solid profile. You will usually, because you are linking her, you will usually take the tactical awareness profile. It's 25 points for a tactical awareness specialist. That is okay. She doesn't really want a gunfight. Ballistic Skill 12, Armor 2, BTS 3 is not the worst thing in the world, but it's not what she's here for. What she's here for is that tactical awareness and being both a doctor with a reroll. Now it's reroll -3, but it's still a whip 13 into a willpower 10 roll before you have to spend any command tokens to reroll, which is very high odds of succeeding. It sits about halfway between willpower 16 and 17, which is just like, what? In Panoceania? What? A willpower 16.5 doctor? That's insane. Yes, it is. It's outstanding. She's also got a medikit +1 burst, randomly for when you need that. And on top of all of those things, the actual really important thing about her, and by really important, I mean really important in addition to her being a tactical awareness doctor, is that she counts as both a Fennec and a Kestrel trooper, which means she slots into and rounds out fire teams incredibly effectively. One Fennec Fusilier, Indigo by Bipandra, and a Crux Knight is a 2-person fire team Fennec core. But because she counts as both a Fennec and a Kestrel, she also opens up things like duos. A Griffin and Bipandra is a pure Kestrel duo, and like, what a fire team that is. That's a burst 4+1 HMG on an outstanding gunfighter, and there's tactical awareness, and there's a doctor behind the dunk gunfighter, who is also a specialist, and the total package is comfortably less than 80 points, 2 troop slots, 3 orders. Like, she is outstanding. She's outstanding, and she will slot into just many, many lists because of that fire team flexibility. And since we are talking about all the fire teams she slots into, let's now talk about Kestrel fire teams. Now, frankly, most of the time for me, Kestrel fire teams consist of that Griffin and Bipandra duo that I mentioned. I don't really need to add much more to it. That is a legal duo. It very comfortably relieves pressure on your fire team core and Haris teams to open up some other options. There's not really much further I think you need to go, but you can run a fire team Haris, or some other combination of troops potentially, and so we may as well mention the Firefly's clandestine demo squad. Now, in another life, before the balance update that took turrets out behind the shed and shot them, the Firefly mine layer was probably one of the most broken profiles in the game because it had a marksman rifle armed turret and mines, and was an NCO, had a submachine gun and a Panzerfaust, and slotted into multiple interesting links. Now that it is no longer possible to reload the armed turret, the utility of the Fireflies has waned quite a bit, but they are still NCOs. NCO is not hugely useful. I mean, it's a very nice skill to have, but we will often be taking a Strategos Lieutenant in this faction. But it is worth remembering that even if we take a Strategos Lieutenant, by having an NCO in a different group, you have some flexibility about how that order is spent. Strategos is an optional skill. You can choose not to use it at beginning of round. If you do, it becomes a regular lieutenant order again, at which point it can be spent by an NCO. So there is some utility in having your strategic lieutenant in one combat group and your NCO in the other. You also just have the option of not necessarily taking a strategic lieutenant. There are other very viable lieutenants in this faction, including at least one lieutenant with +1 lieutenant order. And while that model will usually want to spend its orders itself, it doesn't necessarily always have to. And having an NCO offers some flexibility there. Now, there are a bunch of profiles here on the Firefly that you might give some consideration to. The main ones that are of interest to me, I think, are the Engineer. The Engineer can be duoed with a tag. That is of moderate utility. And then the Hacker is kind of worth mentioning as well. Willpower 13 and BTS 6 plus Stealth are kind of just nice qualities to have on a tag. On a Hacker, sorry. If you want to have a second hacker after the Fennec Fusilier in a list, a second regular hacker, the Firefly is not a terrible choice. It's not something that I am broadly reaching for. It's not something I think I need in terribly many lists, but it's got AP mines, it is a hacker. If you're doing things like trying to seize and hold territory, perhaps in a mission like the Armory, having a model like a Firefly demo squad to move up as part of a fire team, be a hacker that's a little bit difficult to kill thanks to Willpower 13 and BTS 6, and also lay a bunch of mines in an armory, is a pretty useful application of the totality of the profile. I do think at 24 points you need to use all of the pig there. But even with the tremendous nerf to armed turrets that has basically taken them out of competitive play entirely, there are still some Firefly profiles that have a place. And realistically, if you really wanted to, you could even still use that marksman rifle profile. I would generally, depending on how the game is being played, if I'm going first in particular, I would just use Mine Layer to lay one of the AP mines, and then focus on getting the armed turret marksman rifle down just somewhere that is very annoying for my opponent as part of the regular course of play. Don't know if that's worth 24 points, but if there's any model with a turret in the game that is worth the points these days because of how damn expensive the things are, it's possibly that Firefly. Now, our third and final troop in the Kestrel fire team, and what a troop, is the Hetkari shooter. Very possibly just the best gunfighter in the entire game. That is kind of a difficult thing to measure, right? In absolute terms, you have to think about the fact that tags exist in that category. The Avatar isn't much taken in N5, but like it's up there, so is the Cutter. But if we are talking about best shooters in the game, and there is even the slightest consideration for cost as part of that consideration, then at the top, or very close to the top, is the Hetkari shooter. Clocking in at a frankly disgustingly affordable relative to what you get, 48 points for the most common profile, we have a multi-red fury. Multi-red fury? That doesn't sound that great. That's damage 7, and yes, that is a point to consider. But what else are we getting here? Well, 6-2 move, ballistic skill 14, armor 5, BTS 6. Okay, that's quite good. Ballistic skill attack -3, and marksmanship, which means that most of the time, even outside of a link, this guy is firing 4 dice on 17s and imposing a -3 on any roll to face him. At that point, the damage that the multi-red fury is only armor-piercing damage 7 begins to not matter terribly much because he will generally connect with multiple shots every face-to-face roll because the face-to-face roll is just that good. Now, armor 5, BTS 6 and 2 wounds is durable but not invulnerable. And if you're taking one of these guys, you will usually want at least some kind of a plan for force reconstitution, even if that plan is just speedball. And frankly, for me, much of the time that plan is speedball, because even though the Hetkari shooter can be duoed to get duo, or can be Haris teamed to get duo bonuses, he doesn't count as a Kestrel trooper, but you can put him in a fire team, for example, with Bipandra and a Firefly, and those two count as Kestrel troops, and so we'll give him +1 special die. In my opinion, his gunfighting is so good that bearing the impost in particular of like a Firefly in that team, it starts making the entire team cost almost 100 points, and yes, you'd have tactical awareness and NCO. It just doesn't feel terribly worthwhile. What I want from the Hetkari is to be able to quickly get where it needs to go and deliver fire on target, and then otherwise just have that mobility but be relatively limited in the investment that I am making, because I want to be able to invest elsewhere. I don't want a single has to do everything fire team. I like force dispersion, and with a Hetkari, I can get dispersed force plus truly high water level firepower, thanks to what I prefer to duo the Hetkari with, which is the Pathfinder Dronbot. Now, this is the impure duo that is nevertheless one of the best duos in the game that I mentioned previously. And I don't want to give the impression that we're kind of like skipping past the Hetkari. Really, we could sit here and luxuriate for a little while about how utterly disgusting 4 dice on 17s while opponenting a -3 on its proposition is. Like, it's just okay. Like, I can't say much more than that. That's just one of the best gunfighters in the entire game. Can we just say that a couple of times again? The Hetkari is one of the best gunfighters in the entire game. How do we support that? And the Pathfinder with tactical awareness is my preferred way to do so. For some reason, Kestrel Colonial Force doesn't have FTO restrictions on its Pathfinders. In any other faction, if there would be a TAC-aware forward observer remote, it usually won't be the FTO option, and only the FTO option can join fire teams. That's pretty fair and balanced. Kestrel is not subject to that restriction, which means for 17 points, you can get a grab bag of utility with tactical awareness to staple to whatever the hell you want. And the Pathfinder duos exceptionally well with pieces like tactical armored gears or equivalent kind of pieces like the Hetkari. It adds, obviously, tactical awareness, but it is also a 6-4 specialist, and it has a sensor and a deactivator, and those are very powerful in combination because they let you casually sweep out minefields from outside of line of sight or trigger area. And it's also a repeater, which is only going to be relevant sometimes, but is going to be relevant sometimes in terms of defending your assets against some pieces that might oppose them. And then finally, just in N5 generally, having all of this utility and the tactical awareness on what is frankly not much more expensive than a chump body to follow around your Apex gunfighting piece is useful because of Speedball. And as much as like Bipandra is an outstanding doctor and a Firefly is a passable engineer, and you can duo Bipandra with a trooper with wounds, you can duo a Firefly engineer with a tag, you should probably do that in some of your duos and fire teams. It's good to have access to that. But the Hetkari, you can say the Hetkari is the piece that gets access, prioritized access to the auto med kit. And for that reason, the cheapness of the Pathfinder Attack-Aware Dronbot plus the relative affordability of the Hetkari keep it in the position of a duo that is not actually creating a huge imposition on the entire. It's not spending a third of your total points to get a very good quality Haris. It's spending considerably less to get a very good quality duo, and Speedball covers the only weakness of this team, which is that if the Hetkari goes down, could be challenging to get him back up without a doctor. As long as the Pathfinder is nearby, it will never be exposing itself to danger. The closest thing I have seen Pathfinders do to taking a risk is that just occasionally you have to clear off a repeater, and they will move into range of a deployed repeater, cop the hacking arrows, and then deactivate it. That is the only time I've seen a Pathfinder take anything resembling a risk, which means that the overwhelming majority of the time, they are there just to be the perfect support piece to the Hetkari or to a tag, and also be available for force reconstitution duties thanks to Speedball if need be. And since we're talking about tags, and we're talking about fire teams, let's talk about the armored fire team. And we'll start with the Tikbalang, one of a couple of viable tag profiles in Kestrel Colonial Force. If you're taking the Tikbalang in Kestrel, you are usually going to want to be taking the Lieutenant profile. Now, broadly, I feel like I don't need to sell a Tikbalang this far into Infinity's life cycle. We have been around for long enough at this stage to know that a highly mobile, mimetism, ballistic skill 15 gunfighter is really, really good. It will get where it wants to go, and it will shoot you, and you will be very sad. It is a remote presence tag, which means that even Pan-Oceanian engineers can be relied upon often to fix it, and in many cases to fix it back up to full health, which is really nice, particularly if it's your lieutenant and you want to keep it ticking over for multiple rounds. It benefits from tag com very nicely, actually being quite good at dodging if there's a tech B in a list. and frankly very reliable even at recovering with a gizmo kit on 14s if there's a tech B around. And the reason why I think you should probably take the lieutenant profile is that it's a +1 order lieutenant, which means that you are spending on one model, you have 4 orders, its regular and its tactical awareness and its 2 LT orders, and 4 orders on a 6/4 climbing plus tag is obscene. It's just obscenely powerful. 73 points is not cheap, but frankly, given what you're getting, it's not expensive either. And there are very, very few, if any, active turn lieutenants that come even close to as good as a Tikbalang. The fact that a magistrate can exist in this faction and not necessarily be an auto-include lieutenant is because of pieces like the Tikbalang, just genuinely outstanding. Now you could definitely duo this guy with a Pathfinder. I think that's an option, even if it's just a tactical awareness order to move it up the field, get the Pathfinder in a position where it can do specialist stuff. That is an option, but more often you would expect the Tikbalang to run solo. Frankly, the Pathfinder is cheap enough that you can just pay the points and have the option. But most of the time, my expectation would be to see the Tikbalang perhaps as a Combat Group 2 model, because at that point it's very easy to get an 8 or 9 or 10 order combat group with proportionally few models, and that should be all a Tikbalang needs to move forward, perform some aggressive striking, and move backwards to safety. Just a superlative tag. Panosiania is a tag faction, they should have good tags, and one of the best tags in the entire game is the Tikbalang. Now, notwithstanding the superlative quality of the Tikbalang, equally very, very good are the Squalos Mark II Panoshianian Armored Cavalry Heavy Lancers. Comparatively speaking, these guys are much more of a budget tag, they are fewer frills, they are cheaper than the Tikbalang, and really all you're giving up there is Climbing Plus and Mimetism. Now, those are very significant skills. There is a reason why the Tikbalang is more expensive, because those skills add a tremendous amount, but the Panoshianian Squalos is still just randomly an outstanding piece. Armor 6 BTS 6 is fine as far as tag goes. I'm very willing to bear not being Armor 8 in exchange for being Silhouette 6. Silhouette 6 is the gold standard as far as I'm concerned in terms of nice silhouettes to play with. It's tall enough to be able to often reliably vault things that you would like to vault, but it's not so tall and it's not so fat that it can't move efficiently around the table and hide when it needs to. 6/4 move, excellent, plus 6/4 15, excellent, all of the usual tag things. Randomly has combat instinct, dodges well, gizmo kits well, and has a selection of very interesting profiles. Now, under normal circumstances, we probably wouldn't be too excited about a multi-marksman rifle on a tag. 1 SWC and 55 points, however, isn't expensive, and we are talking here about duoable cavalry tags. Now, while a Tikbalang is probably too expensive to duo, technically it is legal to do so. You can have a pure fire team duo of Tikbalangs. Don't probably do that. The Squalo are cheap enough that you can meaningfully duo them. And if you're doing that, the multi-marksman rifle makes a lot of sense. It rounds out the range bands very nicely, and you can take it and either of the other Squalos and you build your own HRMC, basically. Now, that is a little bit of a niche list building option, but there is coincidentally absolutely a way to get something like a 16 order Panoshianian list that is using 3 tags, and that builds off of a Tikbalang and 2 Squalos, and the Squalos run in duos in that configuration. Is that a meme list? Actually, only barely. It is fully effective and very dangerous, and against an unprepared opponent can absolutely crush it into the dust, because most people are just not prepared to deal with 3 tags running around. More often, the Squalos operates much more as a tag conventionally does, as armored, heavily mobile, highly dangerous support. It's a firepower piece, it is the HMGs that you will usually take, and kind of just a meta read on which you think you need more. I would note that the NCO, if you're taking a Squalos, often that will mean you're actually taking a Squalos, not a Tikbalang. Usually wouldn't run double tag. There's a lot of competition for what you might have instead of the second firepower piece there. And if you're doing that, you're often going to be taking a Strategos Lieutenant, which means the utility of NCO in Kestrel of the NCO Squalos is a little bit lower. You will take it generally if you think, as a meta read, you need the multi-HMG. Speaking purely personally, I don't see too many cases of needing that kind of armor-piercing firepower, the tags that I see in games are more often things like a Squalos, Armor 6 BTS 6, which you can in a pinch push down with a heavy machine gun, particularly a +1 damage heavy machine gun. And so for that reason, I tend to prefer the grenade launcher Squalo, just because it is 4 points cheaper and the utility of a grenade launcher, particularly a ballistic skill 15, damage -1 grenade launcher, can be very high. Either way, as far as rounding out tactical armored gears, having the option of a Tikbalang as a very high quality apex predator and a Squalos as a barely less dangerous but more budget option gives you just a tremendous amount of possibility in the Pan-Oceanian tag space. Also, Max exists, I guess. Now, from the Armored Fire Team, and therefore the Tikbalang, it's time to move on to the final fire team of note in Kestrel Colonial Force, the Corp Fire Team. And these guys are really the source of the friction that we experience over the only having one fire team Haris in this faction. Because a Kestrel Fire Team, which has some very high quality pieces in it, is limited to Duo and Haris. And a Corp Fire Team, led by a BCA Magistrate, is also limited to Duo or Haris. Now, you can very easily run this as a duo. My personal preference is to run my Kestrel fire teams as duos. As mentioned, I think Hetkari and Pathfinder is totally fine. I think Griffin and Bipandra is excellent. Both of those are very good and run just fine as duos, which means I can save my Haris fire teams to be BCA Magistrate and Jackal fire teams. And those are relevant because the Jackals are irregular troopers, and the BCA Magistrate has Fireteam Master Jackal. Now, we'll get to the Jackals next, but the BCA Magistrate just by itself is an outstanding piece. The only thing that even remotely resembles bloat on these guys is they are paying for a biometric visor, which is hardly the end of the world. They are randomly a specialist operative, but the main reason we are here is some of them have Chain of Command. If you want to take Chain of Command and you don't already have a BCA Magistrate, usually that is how you would do it. But this guy, and especially the combi rifle profile, is one of the best. I'm getting a little tired of saying that phrase, by the way. One of the best X in the game. But the BCA Magistrate, especially in terms of cost to payoff, is one of the best lieutenants in the game. For a shockingly affordable 19 points, you get a Willpower 13 Lieutenant with Strategos and Counterintelligence. That's just really good. Like, there is not many options that are better than that. There are lieutenants in the game, not a ton, right? But there are lieutenants in the game that are better in absolute terms, but not that cost 19 points. And that raw, aggressive efficiency of the BCA Magistrate is one of the things that helps Kestrel Colonial Force just kind of afford all of the things that it wants. Now, in my experience, Kestrel is very, very good at going second. And part of why you will have the opportunity to become good at going second is that your opponents will often try and force you to if they can, even if that would be disadvantageous in scenarios, because it's just so difficult to go first into a faction that has such aggressive power and counterintelligence and strategos. The BCA Magistrate is part of why I said Kestrel Colonial Force have just colossal order pools. 17 orders going first after having your opponent strip order from you is not unheard of, and that's because of the BCA Magistrate. That is an enormous order pool. Now, it's a little dispersed, right? Some of that will be, say, 2 different tactical awareness options on top of the BCA providing strategos. Those tactical awareness orders will have to be spent on their fire teams. You are not perfectly flexible, but that is still a very, very high order pool for a turn 1 Alpha Strike, and that's because of the BCA Magistrate. Counterintelligence is good, Strategos as a lieutenant skill is excellent, and getting that for 19 points is just outstanding. If you take a BCA Magistrate, just be safe with them, right? Don't get fresh. Deploy them safely, use them safely. They might never spend an order the entire game. Frankly, that's probably ideal. If you have to move them forward because they're a specialist operative, something's probably gone very terribly wrong. They should spend most of the time securing the very reaches of your deployment zone and nothing else, but they are aggressively well costed to do so. Now, the second part of why the BCA Magistrate is so good is because it has Fireteam Master Jackal, which lets you take Jackals, the FT options in particular, and put them in a duo or a Haris team. They will then become regular, at which point there's 6-point regular orders. That's very good. Like, big thumbs up. On top of that, they have nice weapon options. I will usually take one of each, a submachine gun Panzerfaust and a light rocket launcher, and they also both have boarding pistols, which is really the main thing. This is a very lightweight profile, it is very cheap. Most of the time, they will sometimes be taking linked AROs, but really it's the boarding pistol just for close template defense, and to be a 6-point regular order. So 2 Jackals, 12 points, plus a Corp Magistrate, 19 points, is 31 points of extreme efficiency. And the only reason you wouldn't take that in every single list is if you have some other lieutenant in mind, or you have a Haris team set up in mind that forces you to run a duo instead, in which case you take the Magistrate and 1 Jackal because that's an equally serviceable duo. Both of them count as Corp troops, so in the event you need fire team bonuses, perhaps do ARO with the Jackal as a matter of desperation, you can do so, you get the +1 special die. Just very, very efficient. And that's just the FTO options, because it is in the infiltration options that we see the next use of that phrase I've been using a whole lot recently, the best X in the game. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a take here, just to lead into discussion about one particular profile. I do not, as a rule, think many profiles in Infinity need to be nerfed. Absolutely, balance is a thing that the company should take care of. I don't actually particularly hold to the idea of nerfs, not buffs. I just think Infinity as a system is fairly resistant to needing to nerf miniatures. Mostly because if you think about the big, splashy, and powerful things, even the most powerful and scary and dangerous stuff in Infinity comes with baked in counters. Firstly, Infinity is just a very lethal game. Strictly speaking, there is no model in the entire game that cannot be killed by a combi rifle with the right dice under the right circumstances. And that means that as powerful as any model might possibly be in the game, there is ultimately a ceiling on its performance, right? You can always, if you play correctly and you get lucky enough, deal with any piece. Like, no matter how much of a Rambo rampage Achilles is going on, he can be dealt with in active turn or ARO. He has to assume some risk. On top of that, the order system is what makes Rambo pieces powerful and dangerous, but it is also their Achilles heel. With only a very few exceptions, like very few models generate their own order pool. The Tikbalang is actually an exception to that because it generates 4 orders. But almost every other piece needs orders generated for it to reach maximum effectiveness, which means that even if you can't attack the apex predator, you can attack the models that are fueling them and neuter them that way. And what this means is that very few models in this game at the top end of power ever really desperately need to be nerfed. I think the Norcaius nerf, for example, earlier in this edition, was very solid. It was a good idea because you could counter Norcaius, but the games where he popped off were just they felt domineering. Removing that experience from the game, totally fine. By and large, though, I don't think many things in Infinity need to be nerfed, particularly at the top end. However, models may need attention if they are too efficient. It's actually the bottom end of the game that needs to have the most attention paid to it, and occasionally may need a little bit of a judicious tweak. And the 11-point infiltration mine layer Jackal is, in my opinion, the only model in the entire game that I actually think probably does genuinely need to be nerfed. And that is because it is, in one piece, for a very low points cost, the perfect defensive model. Like, genuinely, it is the perfect defensive model in Infinity. That is because of the combination of things that it does. Firstly, it's cheap. Half an SWC, 11 points, extremely affordable. Secondly, you get value out of it as soon as you deploy it. You are going to be using Mine Layer to lay a shock mine that's going to put a mine in the midfield. As soon as it deploys, it has done something useful. That mine will be valuable because infiltration mines are valuable. Now, all of that alone would be like, that's pretty reasonable for 11 points. Like, Libertos have existed for a long time, and they have camouflage, even if they don't have a template weapon themselves these days. What is it that makes the Minecorp Jackal that much more effective? And it's the combination of the things that its other equipment does. Mostly, it's that it has an EM grenade launcher, and then a boarding shotgun and a boarding pistol. The EM grenade launcher is the important bit there. It is an irregular trooper. That's actually quite meaningful, although it will often be the only irregular troopers actually generating an irregular order in the list, because you have Fire Team Master, etc. So it's not really a big deal that you have like 2 irregulars in a list. But even if you don't convert its irregular order and it doesn't move, the EM grenade launcher can be used very productively to just go and take a spec fire. You will be hitting most of the time on 5s, but that's going to give you a 5, 8, 10% chance to land an EM grenade round, and an EM round in the right place at the right time can just win you the game. And even though that's only a 5, 8, 10% chance, you will be spending a few irregular orders every game, and you might have 2 Corp Jackals, which means that you've got not just a 5% chance, but multiple chances, which cumulatively add up to land an EM shot on a model which, if chosen correctly, might be game winning when you land that hit. That alone would be incredible, like just cumulative chances to land EM grenades on key targets. There have absolutely been games that have just been won off the bat by the absolute classic end of round 1. Oh, don't have anything to spend this irregular order on. Oh, I rolled a 5. Oh, your lieutenant's isolated. Guess you're fucked. But the fact that that can happen causes the Corp Jackals to be a weight on the game, and that is the final piece of the puzzle that makes them, in my opinion, the perfect defensive piece. Because you can have a Corp Jackal, or 2 Corp Jackals, or 3 Corp Jackals, just sitting in annoying, hard-to-reach places in the midfield with their grenades in range of the enemy deployment zone, and you have already gotten value by laying mines, and you could be going second and not actually have spent an order, but because of the threat that the 2 of these guys or 3 of these guys that you've taken pose, your opponent knows that they are sustaining risk by leaving them alive, which means Corp Jackals, despite the fact that they are 11-point troopers, and no less 11-point troopers with good close defense options in the form of a boarding shotgun and boarding pistol, which makes dealing with them usually come at a cost, your opponent knows they have to go in after these pieces or wear 1 or 2 or 3 turns of EM bombardment. And because that EM bombardment could just be game winning for you, they have to make the commitment, which means that Corp Jackals suck the air out of offensive actions. Leaving them alone sucks, but killing them, going in after and killing them, sucks as well, because you're not then launching attacks on more important or powerful or dangerous pieces. You're going after these little 11-point shitters, because if you don't, they might just randomly win the game. In my opinion, there should be no Kestrel list that does not run at least 2 of these, frankly, even in scenarios with exclusion zones. They have such an incredibly high, relative to their points cost, impact on the game, going first or going second. They are colossal in value, and they are a significant part of the floor that sits under Kestrel Colonial Force and make attacking into it such of a tick. And for that reason, I genuinely think they, more than any profile, possibly exclusively, in the entire game, they are the only profile I think probably needs to be nerfed, because that influence is unreasonable for a model that costs that few points. Now, having started on midfield models, we'll move on through the other options that we have, and Kestrel sits in this really nice place in terms of midfield where you really do have the option of spending a little or spending a lot. Continuing the theme of spending a little if you're so inclined is the Beast Hunter Free Guild, and since this is Pan-Oceania, you have access to the excellent Pan-Oceanian unique option with the Heavy Flamethrower +1 burst. He is mobile, he is dangerous, and the main thing that he does is lay down 2 Heavy Flamethrower templates out of surprise. Well, sorry, doesn't have surprise. No, it does have surprise. There we go. I've been recording for an hour, I do apologize. Just an excellent piece, by no means mandatory, but very worthwhile, and particularly since we have so many pieces in this faction that are hackable heavy infantry, having models like the Beast Hunter just to launch an attack, even if the close combat here is average, the gunfighting is average, just having that heavy flamethrower to slap down those templates out of camouflage for relatively cheap with good mobility, just very high value. By no means an obligatory pick, but an absolute favorite of some people for a very good reason. Very similarly, and with a similar points bracket, we have the Yamabushi. Now, this guy kind of only barely fits in the qualifier of midfield, but forward deployment +4 and camouflage are just about enough to earn this guy this title, if only barely. Now, what we get here otherwise is an exceptional package. Most of the time you'll be paying the 16 points for the Camouflage Chain Rifle Panzerfaust, and you'll actually be using this more as a deployment zone insulation, kind of defensive option of last resort, because it is a regular order. 16 points is a touch expensive for a model that might never do anything, but it is just about affordable, and because it's regular, you do have that option with the Yamabushi, which is worth considering. If you do want to go active with the Yamabushi, most of the time what you'll be doing is you'll be doing so against models that have moved into the midfield. 6-2 is not slow, but over long distances it isn't fast either, and there are no mobility skills here. So it's a bit of a slog to try and deliver this guy into your opponent's deployment zone. You much more want to be making attacks against targets that you don't have to spend many orders to go after, but provided you can contact, this guy is the best close combat in the sectoral. Now, unlike the Beast Hunter, he doesn't have surprise, but that doesn't matter because he is CC23 with Martial Arts 3, which is the very good level. And he has a shock double action damage 4 CCW, which is a very good close combat weapon, which means that basically anything that is not a CC expert that he gets into close combat with, he has a very good chance of killing. And as a return on investment for a 16-point model, that's outstanding. Now, as I mentioned, most of the time, oh, by the way, Dogged, most of the time what I will use this guy for is more just as a deployment zone picket. The Panzerfaust and the Chain Rifle give it a very nice combination of template at close range, and a Dogged Mimetism template is a great deployment zone guard, but also you can set up to have the Panzerfaust attacks fire across the bows. Like, you want that set up to take long shots, not towards your opponent, but across the approaches toward your DZ. That gives you just one more layer of insulation, and the fact that a random camouflage marker on one side of your DZ can reveal and take a Panzerfaust shot against something crossing into threat range of your deployment zone is a very nice capability to have. Between that and the chain rifle and the ability to move into the midfield and absolutely donk things with close combat makes at least one Yamabushi really nice to have, although at 16 points it can be hard to afford two of them, just because ultimately at that point you start to see competition with other pieces. Finally, in terms of infiltration pieces, we have our more premium option, the Scarecrow Active Recon Group. Now, the weaponry across all of these profiles is a little mediocre in the form of submachine guns and boarding shotguns, which you can nevertheless capitalize on because Mimetism 6 and Ballistic Skill 13 is very high quality. Just be aware of picking targets you can actually hurt your opponent. A submachine gun is frequently going to let you down. There is a mine layer option. You will not very often take it because Jackals exist. And so that means that most of the time, these guys are filling the classic role of the infiltrator, which is the infiltrating specialist. You can use it early in the game in scenarios where that is warranted. For example, in supplies, you can start very close to an objective, smash, grab, and run away. Excellent, and because of hidden deployment, it can be very difficult for your opponent to predict how you might do that. Or there are still scenarios in this game where a dropout of camouflage on last turn, right, appear from hidden deployment and press a button can be a game-winning play. Lots of scenarios have objectives that flip when activated, and where having activated more of them can be game-winning in terms of points, and the Scarecrow can fill that role as well. It's also one of two killer hackers that you might commonly use. There is a third, but it's a bit more of a niche pick. We'll actually discuss it next. And for that reason, and given the relative points cost, much of the time the specialist that you will choose is the KHD Scarecrow. A hidden deployment killer hacker is very difficult / impossible to neutralize until it appears. Willpower 13 and BTS 3 is good enough to do KHD stuff, and it's an infiltrating midfield specialist. 27 points, fundamentally very reasonable for what you're getting there. It is very slightly on the pricier end, but all for upgrades that make a degree of sense. If you are playing a scenario where this fits into your battle plan, very good to have access to. Now, from midfield, we segue into drop troops and parachutists, and at this point we only have two things to talk about in the faction, but they're both very interesting. And we will start with the showy piece first, since I did just say we were going to talk about it. The Black Air, cycling back around to it again, has a parachutist deployment zone version, because of course Kestrel has a parachutist DZ. Now, at 31 points, this isn't cheap. There are other parachutist deployment zone models that are not just cheaper, but considerably cheaper than this. But you do get a fascinating grab bag of things here. Firstly, it's a KHD, Willpower 13, BTS 3. Having a killer hacker able to just appear in your opponent's deployment zone is, perhaps feels a bit redundant in this age of 24-inch range band zero penalty pitches. But since Kestrel's network projection consists of fast pandas, which are 100% reliable but have a limited range, that's not without utility. Sometimes there will be cases and there will be scenarios where decharges and a KHD in your opponent's deployment zone are a good thing to have. And on top of all of that, it's still got Black Air stats, which means Mimetism, MSV2, and Ballistic Skill 13. A submachine gun is not a good weapon, but if you stack enough modifiers, even it will be dangerous, and the Black Air does that. Now, ultimately, the Black Air is a piece, particularly the Parachute Deployment Zone Black Air, is a piece that is more flashy than practical. And that actually puts it in contrast with the piece that is the reason why we don't terribly often see the Black Air, because the Banshee Airborne Assault Unit exists. This thing is basically the platonic ideal of a cheap parachutist combat jump model. Now, there are some combat jump models in the game that are capable of outperforming it along specific metrics. Things like the dropsuit Tariot, for example, is very good at landing and making a mess, and is cheaper than a Banshee. But in terms of utility, there is not a lot that gets better than the Banshee because this thing is cheap, and there are some very interesting profiles here. Just firstly, things to consider. Combat jump at Phys 12, not bad, and Parachutist, you'll use that the most. It has super jump jet propulsion, which is excellent, and it's ballistic skill 12 with an MSV 1. It's also willpower 13, armor 2, and BTS 3. Kestrel has a lot of models, if you notice, that just break the usual Panoceania willpower 12 model. And that's especially relevant because a Banshee has a killer hacker profile. It also has a regular hacker profile, but it's the KHD that we're particularly interested in. Now, there's a light shotgun option with a pulsar +1 burst. That's nice. There's a submachine gun wild parrot option with a pulsar +1 burst. That's also really nice. But the meat and potatoes piece, the model that is just going to reliably do something interesting and useful many games, is the KHD. There are a few things that are at play there. Firstly, it's just a good KHD, right? Willpower 13 with BTS 3 and a little bit of mobility is like exactly what you want. That's really nice for just making the run in and getting a killer hacker kill. And because it's a parachutist, it is safe, right? It does that same thing that like Zulu Cobras can do, where in absolute terms, it is not an Apex Predator hacker, but because it is not vulnerable until the turn it turns up, it always has the initiative, which means it's always attacking on its terms. And that can, like that advantage, right? That active turn advantage, the fact that the Banshee will always enjoy the active turn advantage, actually makes it a tremendous leveler against anything this side of the most dangerous hackers in the game. Because if you can just get the jump on any other hacker, provided it is your active turn and you enjoy the burst bonus and you pick the terms of your fight and you're not face checking a repeater area, the Banshee is good enough to win those fights, right? Anything this side of an Asura or an Anathematic, and sometimes even those, it is a threat to. And because it can arrive from Parachutist, it is impossible to neutralize until it at least has a chance to put that threat into play. It's also a super jump specialist and an armor 2, ballistic skill 12, BTS 3, submachine gun and pulsar +1 burst with an MSV 1 and jet propulsion, which means that even if it isn't going after and doing hacking things or doing specialist things, it's pretty good for the points cost at just selling its life dangerously thanks to that +1 burst pulsar. Very good profile, and kind of the poster boy for how in N5 combat jump models aren't overcosted. You basically can't go wrong splashing one of these into a list, but you're also not obliged to. They are just good, and a capability that it's excellent for a sectoral to have. Now, with this video already running quite long, let's jump into what we would normally call, like in a different video, I would call the at least consider this, or the give this a shot, or the hear me out section. But actually, this is Kestrel, so this is just the special cool stuff that is frankly totally viable, and we will begin with the Drummer's Mobile Support section. Conceptually, one of my favorite ideas in the entire game. Take an Oxbot and strap a HRMC to it. That's just cool as hell. Now, in practice, until a recent profile update, actually a little bit difficult to make use of. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but there were more efficient choices, mostly because the drummer part of the Drummer's Mobile Support section is actually not a tremendously efficient profile. Because you are paying for a 360 visor and a marksman rifle, right, and ballistic skill 13, Auxilla, these guys are not. They're actually kind of expensive, whereas Auxilla, which I really hope come back into the game when NCA are reintroduced, Auxilla are cheap, and Oxbots are cheap, and Auxilla can hide and be regular orders, and Oxbots can be disposable heavy flamethrower pieces. That's a really cool combination. Drummers, the individual line troopers, are a bit too expensive to be purely passive pieces, which means that even though the drumbots are really cool, the drumbots collectively with the drummers are a touch expensive. And the drumbots, as awesome as they are armor 1 single wound pieces. And because they don't have remote presence, they are a little bit more difficult to repair. You don't get rerolls. So if they go down, they're probably down for good. which means that as awesome as the concept is, they were relegated to kind of moderately inefficient piece, with one exception, which is actually the Drummer Forward Observer with Drumbot 5. The Drumbot 5 is the Drumbot with, yeah, it's on screen now, is the Drumbot with Forward Observer, Heavy Flamethrower, and a Flashbot. And what that means is that you have a Forward Observer Drummer synchronized to a Forward Observer Drumbot. That drumbot is far and away the cheapest, which means that the collective price is actually pretty low, and what you get there is a team that can move up the board and do like fighting and assault work kind of okay, and be actually a really good specialist, because synchronized rules apply. Yes, the drummer is only willpower 12, the drumbot is willpower 11, but both of them moving into base contact with the same objective, each of them gets to roll. And collectively, in terms of just raw odds, that is better than being one roll willpower 16. Like, that means that the Drummer Forward Observer and its Drumbot, provided both of them reach the objective, are better at doing an objective than a Carontid is, for example. And that's a really cool thing in Panoceania, which otherwise, well, this is Kestrel, so it's not rolling willpower 12, but it is rolling willpower 13 a lot. Rolling effectively willpower 16.2 is very valuable on a little fire team that is only 21 points and no SWC and has a disposable heavy flamethrower and a marksman rifle, and is just kind of cool. Now, the other profile that has emerged since then, that has been added to the game, is this secondary, these last two profiles there, which are also Drummer Forward Observers with Drumbot 5s, that's fantastic, all of the same reason I just mentioned it's good, but who get added to them one of the big gun Drumbots as well. Your choices are either the Drumbot 1, which is a multi-HMG, or Drumbot 3, which is a Burst 3 Neurokinetic Feuerback. And these, look, they don't quite stray over into snap pick, right? For all of the same reasons. The drumbots with big guns are still expensive. If you're trying to use the drumbots with big guns at the same time as everything else, there can be a little bit of a clash of purpose. The drummer himself is still only an armor 1 line infantry trooper, and one wound that can take 47 points out of action can be a little bit of an issue. But what you do get with this trio is what you wouldn't get otherwise with just the stock drumbot 1, 2, 3, 4 profiles, which is that the cost of the expensive drumbot is still at least ameliorated across multiple pieces. I mentioned that the problem with the big gun drummers teams is that the drummer itself was expensive. Well, with the teams that are running 2 drumbots, that expense is ameliorated across 2 pieces, both of which are kind of worthwhile on their merits, and that makes those very interesting profiles. For my money, most of the time, the profile that if you're going to take these, you think they're cool, the one that you would most often take in is still going to be the Drumbot Forward Observer with the Drummer Forward Observer. It's 21 points, it slots in for something like a Banshee very easily. It's cool and good. But if you want to experiment with some cool techie stuff, the 2 Drumbot, 1 Drummer profiles are well worth experimenting with. Now, second to last in our list of super special cool stuff, we have the Blink team, which is the, of course, Kestrel has a hidden deployment MIM6 ARO piece. It's not quite a Noctifer, but it's much cheaper than one, and a ballistic skill 13, damage 5 heavy rocket launcher dropping out of hiding to take an ARO is a pants-wetting moment. Not quite as much as a Swiss Guard missile or a Hack Tower missile or a Noctifer missile. It isn't a missile launcher, but the multi-sniper or the HRL are both models that are potentially very dangerous. Both can also at least theoretically be used in active turn. Only burst 2 is definitely an issue, but surprise attack, MIM6 and BS13 can absolutely carry a firefight, and they have assault pistols as well, and the wild parrot is a wild parrot. Now, I will make the note that these guys are not super commonly used. Ultimately, 1.5 SWC is a high cost in Kestrel. There are builds you can make in this faction that accommodate that, particularly ones that are using things like the Crux Knight and even in a pinch Thunderbolt Fennec Fusiliers. There are 0 SWC firepower options we have access to here that let us afford a Blink team. But it is a single wound armor 1 piece. You tend to get one really cool shot, and if you haven't picked your moment really effectively, that can kind of be the end of the Blink team, because there are, like, smoke shooting is really popular in this edition. It's really good, and unless you've done things exactly right, it will absolutely do the Blink team in. You need to be judicious with this guy. You need to pick your fights. You need to actually consider when it is best to use it in active turn to do something surprising, but all of that potential does exist. I like blink teams. I just don't use them a ton in games. I think if you are, particularly if you're a long-term Kestrel player, part of an established community, or you have like routine or regular opponents, the blink team is the kind of model that is a very, very good idea to run once every 5 or 6 games. Most of the time in practice, your opponent will be able to tell when it's not going to turn up. SWC counts for Kestrel Colonial Force are very face up, but just keeping this thing living a little bit in your opponent's mind is something that is worthwhile to do, and there will absolutely be games where it has high value. I have a couple of good mates who personally don't like it and don't use it, but I've also got a couple of mates who do, and it's worth your time. Finally, and we aren't going to spend a ton of time on this, the Red Eye Close Air Support Squad fundamentally struggles because it is very, very close in points cost to a Squalo, and a Squalo is really, really good. But the Red Eye has a lot of value. All of my complaints, particularly about things like the Go Pod, don't apply here. The Go Pod is made of glass. The second it gets looked at in the wrong way, it goes down in flames. It is very susceptible to being partially countered by any number of skills, Warhorse, MSV, etc. At least Warhorse or MSV1 are very common, which means the GoPod is often having some of its offensive action neutralized, which means the GoPod is not nearly as dangerous a gunfighter as it looks, while occupying a lot of physical space and a lot of SWC. The Red Eye is much more expensive. 45 points is not fucking around as far as points cost goes, but it is armor 6. And armor 6 just puts it in a position where it goes the distance much more reliably. One piece of bad luck does not necessarily send the Red Eye spiraling down in fire. And that means it is more able to do all of the things that you might fantasize about a vehicle doing. Now, personally, still not really my kind of model. I don't hugely like vehicles in this edition. I don't necessarily think they could be buffed because they are the kind of piece where when they are having a good game, they are a little bit oppressive because hypermobility is like that. But genuinely, I do think the Red Eye sits, despite the very, very high costs, close to the top of the pack. Ballistic Skill 13 is good, a Spitfire is Burst 4, you just have to make peace with the fact that you are spending 45 points for a Spitfire. It's just damage 6, it's very easy for that to bounce, but as far as vehicles in this game goes, the Red Eye deals with the vulnerabilities of the platform the best of any of the vehicles, and if you are willing to pay the points cost, is likely to give you good and interesting games, and hey, worst case scenario, it has a Ballistic Skill 13 grenade launcher. Now, wrapping all of this up, this has been a slightly longer episode, we have a sample list. And this list is what I would kind of call gold standard Kestrel Colonial Force. It is using just many of the pieces that I consider really give the platform the strengths that it has. It's using a lot of the pieces that we have spoken about over the course of this game. Video, whatever, it's been an hour and 15 minutes, leave me alone. And while you can absolutely tinker with it a number of different ways, I would also wholeheartedly be comfortable recommending this. We begin in Combat Group 1 with that duo that I mentioned, a Hetkari, Multi-Red Fury, and a Pathfinder Dronbot Tactical Awareness. The Pathfinder tactical awares the Hetkari around, is a specialist, can deal with midfield threats, can press buttons, and the Hetkari shoots your opponent in the face. We then have a 4-person Fennec fire team consisting of a Griffin Flareback. It will be Ballistic Skill 15 because of the Fennec bonuses. There are 4 Fennecs in that team because the Griffin counts as one. A Fennec Hacker, a Fennec Forward Observer with Disco Ball, and a Fennec Triangulated Fire with Mine Layer. The Triangulated Fire model is kind of particularly important here because it is, as I mentioned, this is a thing that can happen in this faction. It's the only model with a long-range gun in this list that is not subject to albedo. Just kind of bear that in mind. It is not your first choice of firepower piece, but even if that Griffin goes down, remember that you have a serviceable gun still available in the Fennec Fire team. Otherwise, just a ton of utility in this team. Multiple specialists, a mine layer, a hacker, network projection, and of course, ballistic skill 15 plus 1 touch of life back. All of this is excellent. We then have the first of 2 Jackal infiltration mine layers. You will note they are split across the 2 combat groups. That's quite intentional in this particular case, because if I have a turn where I have any orders spare in either combat group, I want a productive outlet, and in this case, one of those productive outlets is dunk, 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 oh, I crit. Hit your lieutenant and I won the game. Being able to do that with multiple different combat groups is just a nice utility to have, so the 2 Jackals are split across 2 Tonga groups. We then have Yamabushi, just the one in this list. You will usually want to deploy it in about a position where there is the possibility, particularly in exclusion zone scenarios, where it could be a Jackal mine. Usually, however, the fact that the Jackal mine will be much further forward means that the Yamabushi is a little bit face up. That's fine, it's still really good to have Yamabushis. Position it somewhere where the Panzerfaust can take a shot across the bows of models approaching your deployment zone. If those models have managed to penetrate the multiple minefields, there are 3 deployed mines in this list, by the way, and your opponent isn't wasting time going after the Jackals. In Combat Group 2, we then have a fire team duo of a Griffin heavy machine gun and Bipandra. This is also a really, really good duo. It has pure duo bonuses because both of them count as Kestrel troops. It's got tactical awareness again. Bipandra is one of the best doctors in the game, and she is a specialist. This is just a really high value for sub 60 points. We then have a Magistrate Lieutenant, Strategos, it's the cheap profile, and 2 Jackals. I went with 1 of each Jackal, 1 LRL, 1 Panzerfaust. If you need to use them as arrows, that can offer just a little bit of flexibility, ultimately much of a muchness. These guys are mostly 6-point regular orders whose job is to defend the Magistrate. We then have our second Jackal Mine Layer, and then a Banshee KHD, because Banshee KHDs are really good. Gives us a KHD to combine with our Hacker, a Killer Hacker to combine with our Network Projection, a model that is hidden, a Mobile Specialist, etc. And so collectively we have in this list a ton of ability to do classifieds. The only thing that is really missing is an Engineer. Otherwise you have basically all of your bases covered. Just a ton of orders. This is an 18 order counterintelligence list, which is disgusting. A ton of gunfighting, right? A Hetkari, 2 different profile Griffins, and if you need it, you even have the Fennec. You've got some visibility control in the form of the Disco Ball. You've got some close assault in the form of the Yamabushi. And you've even got some good quality hard AROs in the form of potentially either or both Griffins if you really needed to. Obviously, the Feuerback is going to be the more common piece. If you do deploy the Griffin Feuerback as an element that you might choose to hard ARO with, just give some consideration to having my Bipandra nearby potentially to bring him back if he goes down, or otherwise just bear in mind that you have Speedball. This is a faction that makes really good use of Speedball. Usually Bipandra will be able to bring back either the Hetkari or the Griffin or Griffins if she needs to, but she can't be everywhere at once. You use Speedball to plug that gap. Now, one change that you could make, and is probably not a bad idea, is just to consider swapping the Bipandra Griffin duo for the Hetkari Pathfinder duo. Just move them between combat groups. The reason why you might choose to do that is it just gives you consolidation options. You can run a big fire team core and reinforce it if you need to, right? If you think you need 6 cents, you have the option of doing something like pulling the Fennec Hacker out of the fire team and putting Bipandra and the other Griffin in and building a very big, powerful core. There are times and places where that would be a very good option to have, so just kind of remember that it exists. For me, I went with the setup that I did mostly because of range bands. The Hetkari, I expect, because it's firing in Red Fury range bands, is going to want to move forward a little bit more often, whereas the HMG Griffin, if it is quite comfortable staying back, it is more likely to take face-to-face rolls without moving forward much, and that makes it the more order-efficient duo. Because it's more order efficient, I put it in the slightly smaller order group, although that is still an order group with plenty of orders. It's got the Tackaware, it's got the Strategos, etc. Depending on your personal preference, that's basically the change that you might consider making. The Hetkari with the Pathfinder in Group 2 would still have plenty of orders to spend, and the Griffin and Bipandra in Group 1 would give you the option of consolidating the link teams. Make that judgment based on your personal meta preference, your read as to what you're likely to play into, your reader's scenarios, etc. Very easy switch to make. Overall, though, this list is it's one of the greats. This is one of the best lists in the game. It is absolutely rock solid. It has relatively limited vulnerabilities. It is hugely annoying to attack into, and it's very powerful to attack and defend with. You do have to keep the Magistrate safe, but hey, you have Strategos. You can always reserve drop him in a pinch. Yes, he will be telegraphed a little bit by the presence of the Jackals. Yes, there could be some weirdness there, but if you're playing, for example, against Combined Army, and you are concerned about a Speculo Killer dropping down as your opponent's reserve drop, then just take that option. You have a face-up lieutenant in this list. Take measures to take him safe. Don't try and maximize Strategos if doing so would give your opponent a line to put you in loss of lieutenant on turn 1. Just keep the Magistrate safe, play solidly, use the powerful defenses and robustness and strong offensive options, and good crumple zone, and just the everything that this list has. This list is a very good list. Kestrel is an outstanding faction, truly excellent, one of the greats. And I think at an hour and almost 23 minutes, I have sufficiently communicated that point. So, with all of that said, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this. I do very strongly expect to get a bunch of comments that are basically just grousing about Kestrel Colonial Force. It's the nature of YouTube videos, and more than that, it's the nature of the internet. It's a place to grouse and grumble, and so I would conclude this with the note that if you are a Kestrel player, don't scroll down. Or if you do, scroll down just far enough to the comment field and just leave a comment saying how much it is that you like the faction. Because there's going to be people whinging in the comments, possibly some of the Ariadne players who are still salty about the video that I did just recently. Your faction is excellent. It is okay to have nice things. Yes, there are a couple of things that could potentially be tuned down in Kestrel. Yes, it is a faction that I wouldn't be surprised if over time it sees some very gentle balance adjustments. But fundamentally, it is going to be a fairly balance-resistant faction because its design vision is so cohesive. Its suite of tools is broad, but they are broad with a fairly solid design goal in mind, and nerfs, right, balance adjustments are not going to unpick that design goal. Even if there are changes, you will have a very good faction, and you are allowed to enjoy the fact that you have a very good faction. It's aesthetically cool, it's mechanically very powerful, it's one of the greats. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. We release Infinity videos about every week. We also cover other wargames, and it's the support of channel members that allows me to keep putting this content out. With that said, we'll be back with more Infinity content next week. I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week.